Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, not to be confused with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, or Modern Warfare, or Modern Warfare Remastered, which is a remake of Modern Warfare, and definitely not meant to be confused with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Remastered, or Call of Duty Modern Warfare. No, this is Call of Duty 19 Modern Warfare 2, the sequel to Call of Duty Modern Warfare that came out in 2019, which is a reboot of Modern Warfare. All very straightforward and not confusing at all, right? Now, depending on who you ask, the phrase Modern Warfare 2 can mean something vastly different. It can either represent the best Call of Duty game ever to some, or what is seen as the worst game to have ever graced the franchise. And I'm not just talking about comparing it to the original. This new Modern Warfare 2 is the biggest and best-selling game, setting brand new records for Activision and the entire franchise. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best according to players or the community at large. I feel like people either seem to adore this title or completely despise its existence. Now, I'm not here to tell you how you should personally feel about the game. I've just simply got my own thoughts and feelings and everything, which I'll explain here, but you're entitled to your own opinion and the game and surrounding circumstances at the end of the day. But here's the thing. It's important to consider where we're at in the yearly COD cycle, which is get hyped for new game, enjoy game for a bit, get mad at new game sucks, get hyped for new game, only for years later to come back and say, hey, you know, this game is pretty good. Right now, we're currently in the middle of the get mad at the game phase in the cycle, so while that's certainly a part of it, I'm going to be zooming out a little bit when discussing the game and trying to remove my judgments from the lens of that COD cycle and just talk about it for what it is. The things that are quite great and the things that are not so good either. Now, something to consider in relation to how popular this game is and specifically how well it sold is how much of that was inflated by the fact that it wears the name Modern Warfare 2. That title alone carried some unbelievable weight to it, and to use that name in vain would be a big mistake. Surely, if you're going to name your game Modern Warfare 2, you'd really want to make sure that you're bringing something genuinely special and groundbreaking to the table as what the original Modern Warfare 2 did over a decade ago. Right? It's undeniable that a pretty substantial amount of hype for this game is directly tied to the name recognition and the implications that MW2 carries. They did the same thing with Modern Warfare 2019 for their previous title. Now, for all the problems that game had, overall, I have a pretty positive opinion on that title, all things considered. And in some ways, MW2 promised to bring even more stuff than MW19 did, and in a lot of ways, that is actually true. In terms of sheer volume of content, Modern Warfare 2 has far more than Modern Warfare 2019 did, and it's more of a platform than it is a game. It's a whole service in and of itself. I mean, it's very different structurally than its predecessors, and fundamentally, this is why I believe had record-breaking sales numbers and the biggest launch of all time. The factor of its brand recognition, and secondly, it's a game that optimized to appeal to the widest possible audience. COD games traditionally have had three main pillars with their own sort of communities, with a few exceptions here and there, of course, but for the majority of titles, you had number one, a single-player story campaign, number two, a competitive core multiplayer, and number three, either a zombies mode, Spec Ops, or some kind of cooperative game type. But for the broad appeal with Modern Warfare 2, I think it's largely the fact that it has like 6 or 7 different modes and experiences. Like, there's campaign, multiplayer, Spec Ops, Warzone, DMZ, raids, and so on. Like, there's so much, and in some ways, it was inevitable that MW2 was going to reach a giant wide audience and appeal to the most amount of people. But there's a problem. Ask yourself this: what do you trade off when you cast a very wide net? Well, just using logic, I would say depth, and in my opinion, I wouldn't say Modern Warfare 2 has particularly any deep experiences, or at least not in the way that older titles really accomplished. And in my opinion, it's an inevitable trade-off relationship. The more widely appealing you go, in general, the less deep those experiences can be, otherwise it loses its wide appeal. And that is the reason when people say Modern Warfare 2 has no content, and that's why they're upset with it, but that's not actually true. MW2, technically speaking, has probably the most amount of content in any Call of Duty to date, but that massive volume of content is mostly accomplished by blending the same ingredients that are already present in other components of it and spreading it ultra thin but in a wide radius. That is to say, Infinity Ward reused the basic building blocks of the game to create this giant variety of experiences and content, and that is likely appealing to a wider audience of people, but that means those people who enjoy one specific experience feel like they're getting scammed because it doesn't have the depth that they would like it to have.
It really marks the step change, what we're calling a transformational moment for the entire franchise.
What's sort of interesting as well is, despite this being the biggest Call of Duty launch, it's also had one of the sharpest and most dramatic player count fall-offs too. But why would that be? I feel like that's kind of just the nature of their strategy for this title. It's easy come, easy go. Sure, you can use these easy tricks to build up hype, such as literally calling it Modern Warfare 2, saying it's the next era of Call of Duty.
We usher in a new era of Call of Duty.
Warzone 2.0, etc. But when the smoke clears, if people aren't actually satisfied with the depth of said experience, there's nothing sticky to keep them around. Another problem is, and I don't know if Infinity Ward really thought this through or not, but I think it's highly unlikely that every player on your game is going to engage with each part of the game near equally. For example, most people don't play every game mode that I mentioned. Sure, there's some crossover, but in general, I think there's people that only play campaign and then are done with it. There's, multiplayer only people, Warzone and DMZ only players, and so on. This is why the game feels way less social than it ever has been, because it's been atomized and fragmented to the point where the player base is split up so much. It's hard to have these really relatable and deep social experiences when your players are spread unbelievably thin across all parts of the game that very rarely, if at all, ever interact with each other. In fact, when I think about it, it's almost the opposite of what the original MW2 did, or at least as far as the social element is concerned. Back when we only had like 2 or 3 main modes, players were all in the same experience and could more easily interact with one another. And typically, that experience could afford to be more deep as well. But with Modern Warfare 2's ultra-aggressive approach to appealing to everyone, it means that no one is truly satisfied with their little part of the game that they choose to enjoy. And if you're somehow not convinced that MW2 is more of a platform than a game, just look at the damn main menu. Just this corny Hulu looking ass main menu.
There's some really motivated devs here, and you saw the wind.
The moral of the story here is, when you try to cater to everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. So to say that MW2 didn't have any content is false. So to say that they didn't update the game or put anything out is also false. But you may certainly feel that way if you're like most people and really enjoy a few specific modes in COD and don't find yourself playing all the 18,000 different modes equally. They also have this obsession to have a hyper focus on realism. They want everything to be as realistic as possible as it relates to the game's aesthetics and choices.
To make sure that everything that we do is as realistic as possible.
Which has been called the most realistic looking video game ever made. The most realistic looking video game. The most realistic looking video game.
You've probably heard my entire rant about realism in video games and specifically Call of Duty, but this will be important for later on. But another super important piece to consider is that MW2 originally was going to have a premium DLC pack for year 2, or so from what we were led to believe. It would have been some campaign DLC, basically the equivalent of a second campaign, a ton of remastered multiplayer maps as a legacy map pack from the MP side of things, and God knows what else, but that got canned or reworked and is now most likely being repackaged as a new Call of Duty title, presumably Modern Warfare 3, coming out later this year. Does that mean this will essentially be a filler game, which is how a lot of people see the second offering of MW2 being filler? I don't know, but me saying these components of the game don't have as much depth as maybe we were expecting does not mean that they aren't worth discussing or unpacking. In fact, quite the contrary. Especially when it comes to stuff like campaign and multiplayer specifically. There's actually so much interesting material for me to uncover. For example, we all thought skill-based matchmaking was the worst thing to come to Call of Duty MP, but with MW2, it's actually much worse than that. The campaign has some really good stuff in it, but is surprisingly sloppy in other areas too. So that is in no way to imply that this game isn't worth discussing. Matter of fact, one of the most interesting things about MW2 is how, AI generated it can feel at times. I mean, no bullshit. When I say this game has the most uninspired, drone-like, AI generated, generic, basic, sauceless NPC calling cards and emblems I think Call of Duty has ever had, that is made even worse by how little emphasis there also is on player identity anymore as well. In the past, calling cards and, better yet, custom emblems actually used to mean something. Calling cards were a really good way to show off accomplishment. You even had a calling card showcase a lot of the time, but the one that you would wear on your character was usually something to be proud of or something to strive for. Emblems were amazing for creativity, art, personality, and expression. Back in the day, people used to peek at everyone's calling cards and emblems in the lobby. It gave you this real feel for the human beings that you were about to face off on the other side of the screen. Again, making for a more social and personable, unique experience. But in MW2, not only are the calling cards and emblems so incredibly dull and uninspired and lacking personality, but you barely even see them in-game. Calling in kill streaks or just being on a streak, something like that, used to do it and it would pop up. Now it's just a blank name card. They're not really in the pre-game lobbies anymore either, and you don't even see them when you kill someone, only when you get killed. This is a seemingly small thing, but it makes it feel the same match to match, and I can't really help but feel this is where the game appears to be lacking heart, and you can see why it may feel bland and stale from an identity and personality perspective at times. Instead of your calling card and emblem being the thing that sets you apart individually, and your team faction uniting you with others and your team, now it's your choice of operator and skins you wear that define you, which are conveniently locked behind a paywall usually as well. With all of their efforts to make players be more social and identify themselves how they want to, it honestly feels less human than ever when it comes to the match-to-match experience, almost like you're playing just a set of faceless bots the whole time. There's a lot to this which will be covered in more detail, but you get this sense when playing that everything about MW2 is algorithmically optimized to keep your attention and to get you to spend money as frequently as possible. I had a moment when the seasons changed, and looking at the previous Battle Pass, the UI is so intentionally obtuse and clunky that it almost funnels you into purchasing the Battle Pass. It's a borderline illegal practice that Fortnite has also gotten into hot water about. They're called digital dark patterns. I mean, haven't you noticed it takes way more precise buttons to click out of a purchase menu than it does to make a purchase? If you pay attention, the game does subtle things to get you to intentionally or unintentionally spend money to keep you playing the game. While MW2 wasn't the first COD to experiment with digital dark patterns, it's certainly the one that takes it the farthest. It's like that in everything about the insanely runaround menu and UI. It just has that uncanny AI-generated feel to it.
I say Modern Warfare 2's AI is systemic.
Comparing this menu to probably the best main menu in a video game of all time, Black Ops 1, the difference between these two is almost unbelievable. I understand this is the direction that games are taking and that AI is only going to become more and more prevalent rather than less as time goes on, and they talk about how much AI influences their game and even brag about it.
The AI to engage with the environment.
The AI helps player be more immersed in the game.
But my point is, we'd be silly in only assuming that the AI is used for enemy mechanics and stuff like campaign or DMZ. Now, it may sound like everything about MW2 is bad, and I've been fairly harsh about a few things, but don't get me wrong, there is also a lot about Modern Warfare 2 that they really get right, and they do excellently as well. I feel like this game has so much amazing potential that gets squandered by just a few poor choices that were deliberately made, and I can pinpoint those specific choices that were made in the campaign, some changes in decisions in the multiplayer that hold it back, and I think I can nail down one of the core reasons that Warzone 2.0 wasn't nearly as received as the original. And, you know, beyond banking heavily on nostalgia, making questionable choices and casting a wide net and so that no experience ever got to be truly outstanding, Modern Warfare 2 deliberately chose to go in a direction that will either continue bringing it to new heights or could possibly begin to spell the end and initiate the eventual decline of a once great name and franchise. This game is a complicated one because it's not all good or all bad, and without any nostalgia blinders on or letting my perspective be tainted by the COD cycle, I'm interested in truly getting to the bottom of whatever Modern Warfare 2 is up to, and really nailing down what things should move forward into the future and their next titles, and what things should stay in the past. Modern Warfare 2's campaign is supposed to be a direct sequel to the MW 2019 story, which, for all of its flaws, genuinely felt fresh and new in a way that we really haven't seen Modern Warfare go yet. Infinity Ward deliberately went out of their way to make MW19 not play or feel like COD 4's story or writing, and I praised that campaign a lot for taking that risk. But MW2 did exactly the thing I feared it would. Matter of fact, I even called it in that very same video. Let's listen to what I said. So my fear was it basically is going to become the same old story as Modern Warfare again, or things that we've already done. Like, I just saw this part and felt a little worried that they were going to fall into the trap of just retelling the same story as MW2 or 3 again in the next game, and that the new characters that they've really gone out of their way to establish won't have much to do in the new Modern Warfare 2. That campaign is not out yet. Like, in some ways, sure, MW2 brings some new things to the table and has story elements that were unexpected or brand new for this universe, but as for the majority of it, honestly feels like them taking the safe option and just more or less retelling MW2 almost beat for beat without doing anything more clever with the material or anything unexpected. And for the sake of everything that is holy in this world, does everything have to be a reference? Hey, do you remember Shepard from MW2? Hey, do you remember 627 from Captain Price? Hey, do you remember Captain Price from Captain Price? You remember the boat from COD 4? You remember what kind of name is soap? Hey, do you remember Makarov from MW3? Hey, do you remember this building from Ghost? Hey, do you remember this thing from COD 4? This was in COD. What I find both fascinating and disappointing about the campaign in Modern Warfare 2 is how much it had a great team of writers behind it and some incredible potential that still manages to fumble what it's trying to accomplish in a lot of areas. Interestingly, a lot of the writing credits and people who put together the story are actually the same people who wrote Infinite Warfare story, which is unironically a top 5 COD campaign of all time in my opinion. So for a team like that to drop something, you know, so mediocre by comparison was a real letdown. Also, this was not part of my original script, but I just thought about this. Those who played the MW2 campaign, also the soundtrack. There is something very unremarkable and forgettable about this game's music, and there was this whole controversy and drama that this actually happened about a week or so after the game came out, and it was kind of just brushed under the rug. But clearly, something went badly wrong with this game's music behind the scenes, and of course, like comparing it to the original MW2, you're not going to have Hans Zimmer. Like, that was a miracle to even have him on the project, so it's not really fair to compare. But even so, there's like moments in this campaign where there's like no music for certain things that should have it, and it's just an all-around mess when it comes to its audio, and now it kind of makes sense. Look, spoilers, but I think it's pretty obvious. I don't really like this campaign very much. Even though the writing itself is very competent and it's acted really well, all of the cast have great performances, those aren't really the core problems for me. I think one of the biggest issues with this campaign, and every other one since Modern Warfare 2019, is the fact that seasonal cutscenes are now apparently canon to the COD universe, and so now campaigns can't just be standalone stories. This is why sometimes they can't have a satisfying ending or a strong conclusion, because they have to dig it back up in later seasons. Perfect example, and one I called months before MW2 released. Alex from Modern Warfare is not dead. I went on a whole rant in that video about why that was a stupid thing to have happen, but many people who watched that video in the comments disagreed and were like, bro, Alex is dead, trust, you know, that's just Raven digging him up for later seasons, only for him to literally reappear in some random cutscene in Modern Warfare 2.
Creative writing.
Look, I don't really care about Alex's character or not, but it's just an example of the bigger problem. They are afraid to actually commit to anything or kill off any characters or to do something memorable or shocking because they might need to use that character later on.
Because, you know, this is like the smartest
This drives me crazy, and it's not just COD, but video games more recently in general. The original Modern Warfare series was just trying to tell a cool and memorable story, so they made decisions that stuck with you. But the new MW2 is all just vapor when it comes to the stakes and weight of things. I never got the sense that anyone was in ever any real danger or had reason to care all that much. The story has some good moments in it, but is surprisingly shaky and underwhelming for the most part. We'll dive into that more in just a second, but also the gameplay even misses the mark in ways that are just baffling. Some of the level design and choices feel so amateur and not thought out at all. The story and gameplay are both definitely flawed, but I think the worst thing by far is that they really failed to capitalize on what they set up in Modern Warfare. It's like everything in all the characters that were, you know, interesting in the things that they tried so hard to put into the forefront, and the things that I was interested in the direction of what was happening with them pretty much all get thrown out the window. So let's talk about the story of the Modern Warfare 2 campaign first. The game opens up with Ghost and Task Force 141 working with Shadow Company to assassinate some guy named Jabrani, and who this man is not really that important. This is simply to set up the motivation for the game's bad guy, Hassan. Wait, I'm sorry, wrong picture. This Hassan. General Shepard and Kate Laswell have intel that Hassan is moving weapons, supplying terrorists, and setting up for some kind of attack that needs to be dealt with. Shepard and Kate end up tasking 141 to deal with Hassan and put an end to it. The opening mission of the game has Soap and Ghost lead a small team to kill or capture Hassan. However, upon invading the compound, Hassan is nowhere to be found, but what they do discover is an American missile in possession of Al-Qatala. Clearly, this raises major red flags. And the lads are kind of confused about this information, and Shepard orders that the missiles be destroyed and not investigated like Kate Laswell suggests. And for no reason at all, Kate somehow knows Amsterdam is a smuggling hub and will be key in this situation.
Amsterdam.
How she knew that, I honestly couldn't tell you.
Creative writing.
But if there is some reason in-game where Kate actually knew about Amsterdam and why she has that information, once again, please keep it to yourself, because I really don't care.
Creative writing.
But she calls Price, who's working with Gaz, to further investigate in the city. Now, flipping over to gameplay for a second, Modern Warfare 2's campaign is entirely linear. There are no side missions, no intel drops, no alternate endings. It's very straightforward in terms of how you're supposed to experience it. And the first couple of missions are really solid, in my opinion. You've got your more classic, traditional military firefight stuff and that kind of gameplay, followed up by some stealth and strategy mission stuff in the water that also has a few firefight elements, and then it leads into a non-combat level full of decisions and so on. Like, the gameplay variety at this point in the game's first act is pretty strong, and it has enough going on to be engaging and isn't too much to be mindless or overwhelming. It's paced almost perfectly from its story setup and its gameplay levels and sequences. Now, I also tend to think another problem with MW2's campaign is the fact that it has a pretty good opening, but it really tries too hard to introduce all of these other things throughout the second and third act. They're just trying to do way too much, and I think this game really drags down in the middle and just completely falls apart near the end, but I'm getting ahead of myself. After the opening levels setting up Hassan, figuring out where his connections are, going to Amsterdam to capture some important targets, we then get introduced to Alejandro Vargas and Rudy. And from the information that we were able to extract from Amsterdam, we actually figure out that Hassan is using the cartel to smuggle him over the border, and most likely, you know, Hassan is going to be found there. So Kate personally puts Alejandro and Rodolfo on the case to catch him near the border and put a stop to him. The setup of this mission is really cool. You're on the Mexican-US border, and you have to weave through homes while trying to keep people calm and, you know, de-escalate the situation if possible. It feels like a pretty realistic take on a scenario like this. In fact, this mission is so hyper-real that they even get the most realistic take on American police. Anyways, so Hassan was there, but the attempt to apprehend him was unsuccessful and he escaped. So there, very solid opening act. Decent introduction of the characters and bad guys, but after this cutscene, this is the moment I started to realize I was being taken for a ride. And the whole campaign, up until the very end, is just a giant chase of, where's Hassan?
Hassan Zayani.
Hey, are you guys looking for Hassan right now?
Everywhere. Look, Hassan's
Did you
uniform.
check, is that his stream share? Did you check Twitch? Is he streaming right now?
We need to capture Hassan.
Let's find Hassan.
Where are they holding Hassan?
I
No
don't
sign
know.
of Hassan.
Why do you keep asking me?
If Hassan's here, he's in this room. Clear, no
Isn't this
Hassan.
your job?
We got a hit on Hassan.
How do we find Hassan?
Positive ID on Hassan.
Did you check the TwitchCon phone pit?
A lot of fucking milk.
Russia gave the missiles to Hassan.
Where's Hassan?
I heard he might be in the TwitchCon foam pit.
Hassan and his AQ soldiers are with it.
Hey, have you guys found Hassan yet? Are you guys still looking for Hassan?
Fucking milk.
Believe Hassan is holed up in a fortified
Hey, I think I know
server
where
on the
Hassan
50-foot
might
floor
be.
Of this
Maybe.
building, but you have execute authority.
I think I know where to find
kill
Hassan.
Let's hope Hassan's there. Negative on Hassan.
Did we find Hassan?
Hassan could be in the next room.
That's a lot of fucking milk.
No Hassan. Nation's negative on
Hey,
Hassan.
have you guys found Hassan now?
In the stairwell. We're going for Hassan. Where's Hassan?
I don't know.
Behind those doors.
Why do you keep
Get
asking
positive
me?
ID on Hassan.
Hassan's in the last car.
That's a lot of fucking milk.
So anyways, back to the story. After Hassan escapes, it's like, okay, now Soap and Ghost, Alejandro and Rudy are teaming up with Shadow Company to hunt down Hassan in Las Almas, Mexico. Shadow Company are your only forces you can use as to not start a war with the country of Mexico. Makes sense, but this is where most of the filler arc of the game comes into play. After traveling to Mexico to look for Hassan, among the cartel that is most likely hiding him, you engage the Mexican army and have to escape. This mission is fairly fun. You know, it's an entertaining sequence going from the upper village area on the hill to down the mountain and then jumping in the water to get away. It's a fine level that's perfectly paced and actually has some exciting moments. That is until you get to the secondary part of this mission, which is the AC-130 level. My god, I'm about to go on a rant. Look, I understand perfectly wanting to do a bit more tactical feeling mission with an AC-130. They just blow things up, and I get that you maybe want to add another layer to it if you can, but holy hell, this mission is not it. You genuinely spend most of your time in this not shooting. You can pretty much not push any buttons at all and still beat the level. Basically, you have all of these rules and clearances you need to get cleared before you can fire on stuff. Certain buildings you can't destroy, or if you do it too fast, the level will restart. I don't even hate the idea of this mission, but it's like sucking all of the fun out of being in an AC-130, and worse yet, it lasts so long. Do you remember in the original MW3, you know, the one mission where you were in Paris? It basically cuts back and forth between the AC-130 stuff and the ground level. It keeps it engaging, fresh, and fun mechanically and visually. Why the did they not do that here? This mission was the perfect opportunity to do that idea with this group on the ground and then Shadow Company in the air. Instead of jumping between those two situations and perspectives, this mission in reality, you're in an AC-130 for 25 uninterrupted minutes, and most of the time, you're not allowed to shoot. I know I'm not the only one that had a problem with this level, and I don't understand how you can look at AC-130 bits from stuff like COD 4 or MW3 and how well they did it and be like, yeah, let's have them spin in a really slow circle for almost half an hour, but punish them if they shoot anything that has bureaucratic red tape on it. Like, honestly, what is going on? It's a cool idea, but they managed to suck all of the fun out of it. It would have been so much better if they simply switched from ground to sky occasionally, but they missed the mark so bad. It's single-handedly the worst mission in the whole game, and the end result feels even more like a pointless slap in the face. So you end up capturing Hassan, but since it was done through politically questionable methods, you're not actually allowed to take him for some reason.
Creative writing.
I understand there's like rules and policies in war, and it would be, you know, there's some war crimes and stuff you can't cross. I get that. I understand all that. But was the only option really just to let him go again? Only so you can try to capture him again. It's stupid, and clearly this was only done because we need to stretch out the game and have more missions, not because it naturally goes with the flow and plot of the story or his character, and it also just goes to show how non-convincing Hassan is as a villain. His motivations are incredibly simplistic, and he himself hasn't really done anything yet to make us outright hate him. But this is just the start of the filler stuff. So, because you have to let Hassan go out in the wild, again, after catching him like he's a fish, you do get his cell phone with information about more things being moved on an island off the coast of Spain. Once again, just like the AC-130 sequence, they also managed to get this mission so wrong in a lot of ways. So Kate is on a boat providing overwatch, Price and Gaz are in ghillie suits and try to evade the compound and grab intel. This mission is very clearly trying to capture the spirit of All Ghillied Up from COD 4, but that level had god-level pacing and strategy. This mission, however, tries to recreate those moments, but feels so stretched out and you know, without actually building up any atmosphere multiplayer or doing anything else worth noting. I find this level incredibly boring for the most part, until you get up to the warehouses where you have to like clear them out. You got this giant arsenal of tools in your backpack that you can craft things and, you know, approach it in different ways. It's got some really good sandbox moments in the gameplay, and I do wish this level really committed to that idea for the majority of this mission, because it's the best stuff, and the levels that do utilize that more are excellent. But to me, this mission comes across as blindly attempting to recreate the magic of older COD stealth levels without really understanding the principles that made those fun. This one is just a walking simulator where nothing gets added. So basically, as you cut through the compound, Price moves a washing machine, goes in the thing, Kate gets captured by Alcatala on her boat that for some reason thought it would be a good idea to be on by herself. So she's captured, and now we have to track her down and rescue her. What do Alcatala want exactly with Laswell? Who knows? Maybe as a bargaining chip? Maybe, but for what exactly? Nobody knows because the game doesn't tell you. Now, this is also the second worst mission in the game next to the AC-130 level. From a gameplay standpoint, I totally get what they were going for here, and they wanted to implement some interesting vehicle gameplay and mechanics to make a very exciting sequence, but it's really sloppy. One of the biggest weaknesses of this that really takes me out of it is that you have to chase down these certain vehicles and cars, but it doesn't feel like an intense chase really. Like, I don't know what it is, but the slow, clunky feel of the cars, or the fact that the level loops around infinitely and it's built like a Mario Kart track, the GTA carjack animations, all of this stuff, you know, kind of in combination makes this level feel a lot more silly than it does exciting. And I can see what the sequence could have been in my head, but it's very hard to go from concept to real playable level without losing something in the process. And unfortunately, that's what I think happened here. It's a boring slog of a mission that I genuinely feel myself checking out from when I have to play it. And also, to make matters worse, this whole aside where Kate gets captured has no ultimate point or purpose for the plot of the game. Like, actually nothing happens. Gets captured in last mission, the lads and Farah come to save Kate. Kate is fine and has intel about the next thing. And God, don't even get me started on Farah. Again, I don't care if they have her in more seasonal cutscenes or raids or whatever. I was very interested in what was next for Farah and Hadir and their story to continue from Modern Warfare, but they pointlessly shoehorn her in here as a cameo that serves no real purpose to the overall narrative. This mission really annoys me from a gameplay and story standpoint because it just doesn't need to be here. It's fluff to make it feel like there's more going on than is really the case. So ultimately, Kate ends up being completely fine, and we're pretty much right back to where we were before we did this mission. Great stuff, right?
Creative writing.
So then we cut back to the boys trying to get info with El Sinombre, the cartel leader. The idea is to get in there, give them some intel they want in exchange for a meeting with their leader, in which Alejandro, Ghost, and Shadow Company will pounce. I actually really like this mission, but to me, it misses so many opportunities to do something interesting where it could have been great. So for starters, when Soap gets taken downstairs to be interrogated, you have this bit where you have to like answer questions honestly. If you don't, you die. However, even if you get it wrong, you get unlimited chances to get it right. Ultimately, it takes something that could have had some choice or maybe some different permanent outcomes or whatever, and manages to make it linear in a way that's totally predictable and pointless. Tonally, I like this moment a lot. You know, Soap's dynamic with Valeria and Alejandro being in disguise is a setup for a very memorable mission. And then the second half is sneaking around this compound to get to the roof and find El Sinombre. But this is my biggest complaint of the level. I love this mission in Cold War, where you're doing kind of the same thing, but it's like this giant interconnected puzzle box with a million different ways to accomplish your task, through dialogue or any other means. Even this one in Call of Duty World War II, same premise, you're in disguise and you have to manipulate and maneuver the situation without blowing your cover and think through your actions. This is the level that it's trying to be. However, this one in MW2 is much less interesting. There's really no talking to other people. The only stuff you really need to do is maybe kill one guy and run to the roof. It just doesn't have the depth that made those other two missions really stand out. Once again, I like it and I think it's fun, but it's a massive missed opportunity to do something above and beyond. That's the problem with COD campaigns in recent years being so linear. You don't get to have that interactivity that has any real weight like others have done in years past. But this mission ends in you capturing El Sinombre and finding out that the leader was a woman the whole time?
Yeah. and the simping. Now I know that I take notes. I take notes of everything I see because I want to be able to like communicate with them.
Valeria essentially served with Alejandro in the military before, but she ended up killing the leader of the cartel and taking over herself, becoming El Nombre and betraying Alejandro and the rest of their military. Valeria has some intel on the last few missile locations that Shepard still wants destroyed, and the next one is out on a rig in the ocean. This one unfortunately ends up being the last mission in the game where I was still pretty engaged with what was happening. The gameplay of this level is really fun too, and up until this point in the game, everything has still been set up well, maybe a little mishandlings of missions here and there, but it still makes sense and is coming along. But it doesn't last. Shepard orders this missile to be destroyed on sight. So you fight your way through this oil rig and all these ships to where you eventually make it to its main controls, you input a thing, and then the missile self-detonates at the rig. And the lads have an epic gaming moment with fist bumps and bro hugs all around. Only for the very next scene to ruin all the goodwill this campaign has built up and is the stupidest thing to ever happen in this campaign. So, with the missile taken care of, the boys get back to the base where Graves promptly tells Alejandro that his boys have been detained and that he's taking over now. Soap is like, hell no, Shepard needs to hear about this, and then Graves is like,
General Shepard sends his regards.
And in case your brain is too stupid to comprehend what just happened, they had to literally spell it out for you and change Graves' name tag to red to tell you that he's now a bad guy. It's a small thing, but I hate it. It feels like it's treating you like you're stupid and you can't understand it. And there's so much wrong with the setup and the twist itself that makes it so much worse and less satisfying than the original MW2 and just isn't what it should have been. But we'll come back to story momentarily. After Graves betrays you, though, Alejandro gets captured, Soap and Ghost escape and get split up, and now we cut to Soap in the mission called Alone, which ironically is the mission that gamers play every day in real life. Anyways, I'm just kidding, but Alone has some of my favorite stuff in the entire campaign, all packed into this one level. In terms of its gameplay, you have to very carefully observe and interact with your environment to craft things, distract enemies, sneak around, and get to Ghost. But there's actually a surprising amount of depth to the sandbox and ways to approach it. You can even get special weapons by finding codes and inputting them on saves, disarming traps, and so on. And from a narrative point of view, you get to learn a bit more about Shadow Company. While they're executing innocent civilians, some of them are relentless, and while other shadows question if what they're doing is right. You get a lot of time to world build here, and the mission plays distinctly different each and every time it's played. While this level is ultimately meant just to reunite Ghost and Soap after the situation with Graves, it is a nice little change of pace for the rest of the third act. While I do feel this level still has its problems, its strongest suit is its unique gameplay and dreary atmosphere that it establishes. Eventually, though, Soap and Ghost do reunite and escape the town. Then the next move is to locate Rudy in the safe house and then team up to rescue Alejandro from the prison. Now, I gotta be honest, I want to like this mission so bad, but just like the AC-130 and car sequence and the Gilly mission, MW2 has a tendency to have these moments that overstay their welcome. Guiding Ghost around the compound with these cameras after breaking in, this little like puzzle bit and using timing and decision making is honestly an amazing idea, and it's great for like the first introduction, maybe the first couple of minutes, but I think this drags on a little bit too long to be fun, even when you're optimizing it. I understand they probably laid out a whole puzzle and then fit the level to that, but for the sake of pacing and fun, and all those other ones I just mentioned, those previous missions, could really be shortened up a bit. It's like these missions need an editor to go in and just cut a few areas out to make the overall experience smoother. The rest of this mission is fine though. You know, you break into the prison, release Alejandro and the rest of his men, where of course it has to be an MW2 reference for no other reason than being a reference. As this mission comes to a close, you manage to extract Alejandro and the rest of the prisoners with everyone else alive, and you finally get a real reason for Graves and Shepard to have betrayed you, and why General Shepard has been acting kinda sus all along. Basically, Shepard was using Shadow Company as his own personal military, but had good intentions and tried to set up missiles in tactical positions, but they ended up getting ambushed by Russian PMCs. Shadow Company was killed off, and the missiles were stolen by the Russians and then given over to Alcatala, and instead of reporting it and risking everything, Shepard tried to cover it up. That's pretty much it. Shepard in the real MW2 was playing you like a fiddle the whole time. He even killed Ghost and Roach on the spot to make himself look like the hero. In this game, instead of that, he had a mission that went wrong, and instead of telling someone about it, he used Shadow Company to cover it up. It just doesn't have that same level of impact where you're like, I need to kill this guy right now. And they treat it that way too. Price is like, we need to kill Graves, but we'll get around to Shepard whenever it's more convenient for us. This is where I felt myself starting to check out mentally. So the only thing left to do now is to take out Graves. The lads and Los Vaqueros team up as a ghost squad or something to find him. But here's the worst part. In this mission, you armor up and push towards Graves that culminates in this tank boss fight, which admittedly is really neat mechanically for a Call of Duty level. But after he gets blowed up, you don't even see if he's dead or not. And I don't want to hear the nerds saying, bro, no one could have survived that explosion. Listen, you remember exactly what they did with Alex, and of course you know Graves is not dead. Actually, I'm pretty sure I saw something the other day that confirms he's still alive. So, you know, like, this writes itself. It's like they didn't even check to confirm the kill. They just crank some wicked air guitars, fist bump, and bro hug each other, and then from the context of the story, this is just plain stupid. After all that nonsense, though, Valeria exchanges some info about the third and final missile in exchange for her freedom and being let go. They agree, and she tells the lads that the final missile is in Chicago and United States and is about to be launched at any moment. And apparently this time, Hassan is actually located here. We get some more, you know, where's Hassan moments.
Where's the sun? Where's the sun?
Where's the sun?
And while visually this mission is absolutely gorgeous, and I was genuinely impressed with the level of detail and atmosphere of this particular mission, mechanically it's you know, more or less that one mission from Ghosts. I mean, even some of these rooms I'm pretty sure are copy-paste from that game. But more importantly, as your chase ensues to finally find Hassan and end this once and for all, the missile that you're here to stop actually gets launched in the middle of the city, which is the dumbest thing to happen in this campaign. But we'll get to that bullshit in a moment. The last little gameplay bit is actually super creative and fun, and you're well equipped to handle it since the mission alone taught you the mechanics beforehand. Essentially, you have no weapons and a few guards are chasing you down. You got to deactivate the missile manually from this box, but that takes time and makes a lot of noise. So you have to maneuver around the room, use tools and items and stuff to distract your enemies, and eventually disarm the launched missile and then take them out. As you deactivate the bomb, Hassan himself ends up catching Soap off guard and is now explaining that the invasion is going to begin. Hassan goes to execute Soap when Mr. FaZe Clan Simon Riley Ghost snipes Hassan from the other building, saving Soap's life. This moment is a little underwhelming. For as much as Hassan was basically the linchpin villain here in a lot of ways, it's not really satisfying to kill him here since he didn't have much to do in the story, and it just feels like this like wild goose chase we were on, this weird random villain that just ends very abruptly.
Where's the sun?
It's not a super compelling villain or an ending to one, and I think they knew that, so that the last two ending cutscenes are where the story totally falls apart. Okay, so for the last moment in this game, we cut to a bar where they're all talking about the situation, and this is post everything that happened. Now, do you remember that moment where the missile launched? Do you remember this little part right here? So this is how it gets explained away.
Officials are saying a power surge is to blame for an explosion over downtown Chicago last night, due to severe winds leaving thousands of residents in the dark.
Wait, what? This might make sense if the missile got launched on some like distant island where people couldn't see it too clearly, but I mean, that launched in the middle of downtown, and apparently no one saw it or recorded it. I mean, that thing was huge, and all you need is a functioning pair of these to know that it wasn't a damn power surge or whatever. And it's definitely not like we live in a world where everyone has a Hollywood-grade movie camera in their pockets at all times, and you're expecting me to believe nobody really saw it or recorded what happened. But I mean, hey, just don't think about that. Look, it's Makarov.
To General Shepard?
Just don't think about that. Look, it's Makarov.
Oh, okay, that's cool, but are we sure that Graves actually died in the,
Hey, look, it's Makarov. Do you remember him from Modern Warfare?
Where did Valeria go after the...
Shut up and don't ask questions. It's Makarov. Do you remember No Russian?
Creative writing.
The only question I have to ask is just why? Why did we need to reboot Modern Warfare if Modern Warfare 2019 kind of felt like taking that material in a new direction, but then in Modern Warfare 2 and probably MW3 are just retelling the same story as the original pretty much? Modern Warfare 3 is going to have a confrontation with Shepard for his betrayal and a showdown with Makarov, who was probably behind it all along, and the Russian PMCs were the one that ambushed the bomb during the thing. Also, if you notice, nobody actually dies in this campaign. Why? Because they're too scared to kill off any of them, since they may need to use them again in seasonal cutscenes or raids or promotional store bundles or MW3 later on. This campaign has no real stakes that actually matter. Nothing of much consequence even happens, and there's no important losses to give us a reason or care to keep fighting. That's what I mean when I say I was disappointed. Considering how great the writing and the character arcs and sacrifices were in Infinite Warfare, for a lot of the same people to turn out this wet fart of a story was incredibly underwhelming. Also, we have no real reason to care about Makarov at all at this point in the story. He just now got introduced, and for no other reason other than we need a new bad guy. And hey, you know, presumably he does the no Russian thing, but on the plane this time, and we don't actually see it, it's just implied. Part of the reason we hated Makarov in the old MW2 was because we saw him and were with him in the airport. We hated him and wanted him dead. You just don't get that same feeling here with this new Makarov that we haven't even been shown yet. It's just so incredibly predictable and sloppy, and the main reason I dislike this campaign. From a gameplay and visual perspective, it's actually pretty good. It's a decent experience. It's not as bad as some of these other campaigns, but as far as what it could have achieved, it falls so painfully short given the exceptional team of writers and gameplay designers behind it. I feel like it's fair to rate this campaign as a pretty below average Call of Duty campaign. Not exactly bottom tier, but not even one of the like above average or really good ones in my opinion. With a few tweaks to the story and some more tightening up of the gameplay, it could have easily been a very high tier one, but I hate to say it, they tried to appeal to the lowest common denominator instead of telling a cool and interesting new story in a direction that we haven't gone before. The stuff with Valeria and Alejandro is kinda interesting, I guess, and maybe we'll see where that goes in MW3, or they'll just can it like they did with Farah and Hadir's story, but you know, since my previous predictions about Modern Warfare about MW2's story were correct, allow me to make some more predictions about MW3. We're going to find out that Makarov was pulling the strings since Modern Warfare. The Russian PMCs were under his control. Makarov does no Russian and frames another country and or another group, most likely the United States. Valeria and Alejandro will have small cameos. Price will confront Shepard for his betrayal and then kill him to death. Someone on this team will die, possibly Gaz or Soap. Graves isn't really dead. Rourke from Ghost comes back. Wait, how the hell did that get? It just makes me so less interested in where the story is gonna go because it's a retreading of the narrative we've already done before, just done worse. So hopefully I'm wrong, and while I don't outright hate this campaign, it's not the worst one ever. It's not even close to being what I would consider a better one, and doesn't even hold a candle to striking the iron that the original Modern Warfare 2 did in 2009. Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer had big shoes to fill. Again, just merely wearing the name carries a certain legacy and weight to it. So how does this new Modern Warfare 2 hold up compared to its predecessor? The thing is, it's not really trying to emulate the gameplay mechanics and systems of the 2009 edition. It's more of a direct sequel to Modern Warfare 2019, which is to be expected. This includes things like innovations on the gunsmith system, perk system, and the create a class at large. However, they also made some big changes to the core player mechanics too. Stuff like ledge hanging, there's a little new mantling and peeking stuff going on, no red dots on the minimap when firing, input-based slides or dives, and the removal of slide canceling or b-hopping from the main game, although it was possible in the beta. And all of those things I mentioned are probably the biggest and most controversial changes as it relates to adjustments in the core gameplay loop. This multiplayer, I genuinely think, has had the hardest sway in the court of public opinion. Maybe it has a bit to do with where we're at in the COD cycle, or maybe it's genuinely a result of bad gameplay design. In any case, I watched this multiplayer be greeted with open arms and into a very happy player base when it was first in beta and even for a while at launch. and to now where genuinely people feel that it is the worst Call of Duty multiplayer to date. But where is the truth in all that? Is it really that bad, or is it somewhere to be found in between those two extremes? It's tricky because there's far more going on underneath the surface of this game than you may realize. But before we get to the more wild stuff, let's look at the game and its maps and ideas and how it innovated and made certain changes to the core gameplay loop. First and foremost, I think the maps and their design compared to Modern Warfare are really good insofar as they got rid of the more weird and random corners and spots. Like, they removed a lot of the visual clutter as well, and they still have room for creative play, although this is definitely more traditional map design than what we saw in their 2019 Modern Warfare. So, you know, now it's worth noting that a lot of the maps are remakes or, you know, maybe slight remasters. Shipment, Shoot House, etc. They're maps with a proven formula, which is totally fine. In general, I think MW2 has a pretty strong map selection, with a couple of outright embarrassing ones. Like, can someone please explain to me what they were thinking? One thing I do want to point out as a quite good thing is a real innovative system on Gunsmith. So Infinity Ward introduced this entire idea. Treyarch and Sledge basically copy-pasted it in their games, and Infinity Ward pushed the envelope again with its weapon platform system as well as attachment tuning. This takes the ideas of create a class and personalized playstyles to a whole new level. Even if this system does come with its downsides, all in all, I think it's at least a healthy way to innovate on a new idea that I can really appreciate. I think the only downside, and I called it before the game came out, I really do feel like it turned out this way, is that the Gunsmith system is now so moldable that every gun can basically be everything else. And what that means is, like, you can make an SMG play like an LMG, you can make an AR play like an SMG, and so on. Like, there's really no guns with verifiable identities or feels anymore because everything is basically everything else. Now, again, there's an upside and a downside to it, but I do feel like that's how it turned out here. Also, while originally I actually was a fan of the perk system, I've grown more and more to realize that it's now become kind of pointless. The idea, at least in theory, was that instead of spawning in with all of your perks active at once, you must earn them as the match progresses. I really like this idea a lot because I felt it addressed COD multiplayer's greatest weakness, which is basically if you're not getting kill streaks, you're not really progressing towards anything tangible as the match goes on. You know, it's something little, but something I was willing to give a chance, and but I think the problem is, after plenty of adjustments and updates, you acquire perks so fast now that you may as well just spawn in with them active at this point. It's a system with a solid idea behind it once again, but they've mutilated the practical implementation so much where they might as well have reverted it back to the classic perk system. While we're on the topic of reverting to an old system, let's talk about the mini-map. This was single-handedly the most controversial change in MW2. Red dots no longer appearing, you know, just from regular firing. What is the idea behind this? According to Infinity Ward, this prevents players from being punished for simply playing the game and stops other players from being constantly hunted, to use their words. Okay, fair enough. I kind of get that, you know, like, people still want to be able to fire their weapon without being actively punished. That kind of makes sense in theory, and even I defended this idea when this game was in beta. I was saying I was willing to at least give it a fair shake before knocking the idea entirely. However, at this point, the experiment has been ran, and I also feel this is inferior to the classic minimap system when it comes to flow and pace of gameplay. There's a lot of issues with it, but I think fundamentally the core design flaw here is the fact that, you know, having red dots on the minimap is not always about hunting players. It's just about gathering data and being able to act on said data. And so if you just don't have this raw input coming in hardly at all, unless you have like a UAV, then you become way more scared to actually aggress or move around or do anything. This is why people play so campy or play so gremlin-y in the game, is because, you know, it's kind of scary to not know what you're working with minimap wise or where anybody is. You're going to play much more defensively if you don't know where anybody could be at any given time. If you kind of know, generally speaking, where your enemy might be, you may feel a little bit more confident to move around. And, you know, this really grinds the pace of gameplay to a complete halt, but that's not the only factor that does it. Now, as as far as stuff like kill streaks, create a class, guns, and attachment variety, and even some map design are really the highlight of this core MP experience. I really do love the weapons. I love the color palette of the environments, and a lot of the maps are really solid in my mind. It's got a much better look and feel than Modern Warfare 2019 did insofar as visuals go specifically. Sure, a lot of them are copy-paste, from past CODs or, a play-it-safe type of design that you can't really mess up, but in some sense that's okay as long as it's still fun. And admittedly, the sound and visual design of the core weapons and, the moment-to-moment gameplay with them is quite satisfying. I really do think that they get the base layer of what makes Call of Duty multiplayer fun correct. However, I started to realize something when it came to all of the changes and adjustments that Infinity Ward was making to MW2 specifically, and it's more indicative of their larger approach, which I was talking about. The gameplay is meant to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Why was slide canceling removed? Because it's something only a small fraction of the player base takes advantage of. Why was B-hopping nerfed? Same reason. Why does the game actively penalize you for movement and encourage a more slower and stationary playstyle in combination with the minimap changes we talked about? Because it appeals to a wider audience of gamers. This game gives me Ghosts and World War II vibes in terms of the playstyles it caters to and what it promotes, and that is not a compliment at all. It's got the bones and core structure of an excellent game with some real depth on paper, but all of its sauce has been removed, either through changes to the movement, the minimap, etc. The skill ceiling, that is how good you can potentially get at the game, feels bottlenecked by the game's larger design, more so here than like almost any other title I can think of. It just doesn't feel good to get better, which is a damn shame because MW2 has so much stuff that I really like in theory, as I mentioned. I love the setting, the weapon and equipment sandbox, the kill streaks are excellent, Gunsmith is super fun too, I love the experimentation with weapon tuning, but all of it's hindered by a couple of absolutely terrible choices that ruin the fluidity / sauce that this game should have. And to make matters worse, in this lower skill ceiling environment, people have a giant issue with skill-based matchmaking. And I'm sure you're tired of hearing about SBMM at this point, and you've already know all about it, but what you may not know is that it's not even SBMM that's the problem in this game. In fact, it's something far more manipulative and sinister. Activision, that is the parent company of Call of Duty Studios, Treyarch, Sledge, IW, Raven, etc., has a lot of technology patents. These can be applicable in any game that they deem fit to use said technology, and the patents are publicly available for you to read, and I'll actually leave some links down below if you want to check them out. However, much of it is written in obtuse technical and legal jargon, so it's not the easiest thing to read or most entertaining, and many of you will probably find it not worth your time. However, you don't need to. I read through these patents, and there's a few key takeaways. Firstly, it's important to understand that these patents get implemented in other games other than Call of Duty. It's any Activision Blizzard title, and how many of these systems are being used at any given time in your game is up for debate. But anyways, some of these complaints that we began to suspect as a community are actually valid, but you have to be careful as some of these speculation spills over and falls into the realm of conspiracy theory. Something that does appear to be true, however, is that the system will manipulate your matchmaking on a variety of factors, this being skill, connection, game preference, microtransaction purchases, match quality, etc. There's a lot of variables going on. And yes, according to the patent, if a player is doing particularly well or poor compared to their normal performance, the system can and will match you with higher or lower skilled players. It can also match you with less experienced players if you've recently bought a microtransaction to, number one, validate that player's purchase, and also to encourage newer players to buy said item. Now, how much of this is being used in Call of Duty compared to other Activision titles like Overwatch or something is really anyone's guess, but they do have those systems technically patented and in place. If you dig through the patents, you're going to find a bunch of weird and fishy things that you may or may not ever personally experience when playing Call of Duty. But one thing is for certain, your game experience and matchmaking are being manipulated in ways you don't even understand. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as skill-based matchmaking. That would be an easy and theoretically simple problem to deal with, but it's much more complex than any of us ever thought. Where it does spill over into conspiracy theory, however, people have speculated that there's a system system that actively tunes your damage output or hitbox size in real time. The idea is that the system will equalize better players' damage and force them to shoot more bullets and or be more accurate to get a kill than a less skilled player. This has been disproven without a shadow of a doubt multiple times, and also, just the basic systems of actual multiplayer barely work sometimes, and to expect a system as intricate and complex as that, what is active damage tuning based on skill, is crazy. You would be fooling yourself if you expect a god-level tuning system to work like that all of the time without any hiccups. A system that intricate is just not possible, but, you know, more to the point, and I just don't know what it is exactly, but those of you who play MP casually may relate to this. This title, more than any other, I feel like I can tell when my game experience is being manipulated in terms of how the match-to-match goes or stuff like that. It's like it's optimized to put you in an environment to control your dopamine release. It's very strange. You know, once again, it's important to not go off the deep end when speculating, but it does seem like there's a fair amount of manipulation going on in your overall game sessions, whether you understand it or not. And this is the main problem I think people have with this game, whether they know how to articulate it or not. People don't like the feeling of being manipulated. Even if it's just harmless things like, oh, trying to match you based on your connection or maybe a little bit of skill parameters, whatever it is, I just think people really get an ick feeling when it comes to the fact that they know their matchmaking is being manipulated to some degree. And I don't know what they're going to do about in the future, but that seems to be one of the biggest issues that we're facing. It's so much more than just skill-based matchmaking at this point. I think with Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer, you've got two main things going on that are holding it back from being awesome. Number one, of course, are the questionable and borderline silly game design choices like the minimap stuff, movement nerfing to create this really sterile feeling environment. While it's got a ton of stuff I love too, you know, the streaks and gunsmith and even just the raw visceral feel of getting kills here is great too, but it's held back by these choices that are meant to appeal to the lowest common denominator. That on top of blatant manipulation that is for sure taking place with your matchmaking and overall gameplay sessions. It ends up feeling like the control is really out of your hands whether you have fun or not, and that feeling of being manipulated in some way is the biggest ick for games and the reason that MP can be a giant turnoff. It's not the lack of content, lack of maps or guns. It's the feeling of its identity being sacrificed for the sake of hypothetical game optimization. Games nowadays have certain targets for monthly active users they want to hit, and designing the game around player retention instead of player satisfaction is really, I think, the primary reason we have the issues we do in the more modern Call of Duty titles and, you know, honestly, more just video games in general. To say that MW2 is a terrible game is just not really true. It has a lot of objectively great things to appreciate 100%, but to say that you don't enjoy the lack of personality and socialness the game appears to have, or to not be a fan of the manipulation you may be experiencing is totally fair. I don't know how Call of Duty is going to navigate this issue going forward, as it only seems like this will, you know, be the direction that COD is taking more and more. Much yet remains to be seen, since MW2's scrapped Year 2 will likely come in the form of Modern Warfare 3 this year, and who knows what approach they'll take. But overall, I really do like this MP experience a lot for what it's worth. In a vacuum, it plays extremely well and is actually fun. It probably falls somewhere in the slightly above average MP experience for me. Take away the weird patent stuff and the just no sauce in the actual gameplay or the personality in the progression system and profile cards, and that are the key factors that prevent it from being probably better than a lot of the entries in Call of Duty. And I'm just gonna say it, I actually prefer Modern Warfare 2019's multiplayer to MW2, all things considered now. It didn't have to be that way, and with a few tweaks, I don't think that would be the case, but this is the decision they ended up going, and the devs have mentioned that they're very happy with how MW2 MP has turned out and how it's going, so I don't expect any major changes to come to this game, and they will probably use this as a blueprint for their next game, but we'll see about that. Now, this part of the video has been a little tricky because typically, you know, three main experiences I would have to talk about in a Call of Duty title, like I said, and that should have been the case here, but MW2 has too many to put under one umbrella, and also, I just don't have the interest or time to play all of these other modes equally, as I'm sure most of you do not either. Once again, there's Spec Ops, Warzone, DMZ, Raids, and so on. These are all pretty much their own fully fledged modes with communities that I just don't find myself participating in often. Like, DMZ isn't really my thing. I've played it a few times, I get the concept, and I think it's a solid mode. A lot of the community only plays DMZ as well. I just don't personally find myself interested in playing this particular game mode every day. Warzone, I've definitely enjoyed a lot more than that, but although even with this, it's not something I play all the time. Spec Ops is a once-in-a-while thing for me as well, despite it having a decent amount of content and a whole other progression system. I don't want to get too caught in the weeds with these, and raids are something I do really enjoy, to be honest. I think they're excellent co-op experiences, and I can actually see these being blueprints for zombies, Easter eggs, and stuff in the near future. But I do want to spend some time giving each mode credit where it's due. Spec Ops, I think, is interesting, if a little underwhelming. Like, it's cool having this class-based system like Extinction from Ghost, and there is a large number of different game types that you can engage in. They feel like a slightly more thought-out version of Spec Ops missions from Modern Warfare 2019, but maybe not as tightly crafted as Spec Ops from the original Modern Warfare 2 or 3. And survival is far better in this MW2 than it was in Modern Warfare by a country mile, but it doesn't hold a candle to MW3's absolutely masterful survival. DMZ, I honestly don't have too much to say about, other than it's a cool and more casual take on the extraction shooter mode that I really love about Escape from Tarkov. That game I've played at least a fair amount, and, you know, DMZ is not as intense or as high stakes as Tarkov is, but I see people generally happy with it as it's a nice, chill PvPvE game mode, you know, where you can do tasks and collect things, but it's just not really my type of mode personally and for my taste in video games, although I will give Infinity Ward credit all day for the experimentation and the innovation to make a mode like this happen in Call of Duty and make it accessible. As far as Warzone 2 goes, and I don't even know if it's Warzone 2, I think they changed it just to Warzone again. I don't know. Anyways, I do want to say something about this. Now, again, just like any live service game, the state that it launched in versus where it is now are completely different things. But I was worried about Warzone 2 before it came out, and we learned a lot about it, because it seemed like they were getting rid of the thing that made it stand out as a BR. I've talked about this before, and I have my thoughts on this, but each BR had their thing, their niche, if you will. Fortnite is the building mechanic. PUBG had this ultra realism and difficult gunplay. Apex Legends had the hero-based mechanics. Warzone originally, in my opinion, the thing that made it different was the Call of Duty patented flavor of class customization in the form of loadouts, right? Just that personalization that Call of Duty was originally famous for, and they brought that into a BR. And with Warzone 2 to have, you know, less emphasis on loadouts was to lose the very thing that made it different to begin with. To make it a more loot-based BR without anything else really going on, this kind of became like inferior PUBG or inferior Warzone 1 for that matter. Another thing across all of these side modes are their new AI. I haven't kept up with everything, but I'm pretty sure they were banking hard on the AI being a giant success in Warzone 2, but as far as I can tell, everyone hated it so much to a point where I think it's been totally removed, and, you know, for good reason. I don't care how advanced your AI feels. It's not a replacement for a real player, and it shouldn't be treated as such in a BR game. That's fine in a PvE mode like Zombies or Spec Ops or DMZ even in which that's literally the point, but to try and shoehorn an AI into a clearly PvP game type is just going to grant you weird results. Warzone 2 made a lot of baffling choices that I felt almost doomed it from the start. That being said, Warzone still is extremely popular and their primary moneymaker in a lot of ways, but I can't help but feel they sacrificed the thing that made them special so early on, which is unfortunate for the launch of your game.
It really marks the step change, what we're calling a transformational moment for the entire franchise.
That's fundamentally what I find so interesting about Modern Warfare 2. You can look at this approach in a couple of different ways. Maybe all of these different side modes are them just creatively utilizing the assets they've already made in an attempt to make as many interesting experiences as possible, or you can look at it in a way where they're trying to cast the widest possible net, but they really sacrificed the depth of any one experience in particular. Like, I don't think this game is suffering from a lack of content. In fact, quite the contrary. I think it may even be a little bit too much, which is something I never thought I would say, especially considering that's something we've suffered from a lack of content in many Call of Duties in the past. But I guess more importantly, I think it's suffering from a lack of focus, not lack of content. And maybe if, you know, they tried all these ideas in Modern Warfare 2, in MW3 and future titles, it may be smart just to kind of, you know, refocus the scope of what they're working on a little bit, kind of tighten up, you know, what they're doing, because I just feel like it's a little bit overly ambitious in terms of what they wanted to accomplish. Good on them for having that ambition and really implementing it in good ways in many of their modes, but also it does come at the cost of not everything works as well as maybe they originally had on paper or intended, and that's just how it is. We'll see where it goes, but Modern Warfare 2 is quite the game, that is to be sure. Give it a couple years, I do have a sense that people are going to look at Modern Warfare 2 very fondly. Mark my words and come back to this video in 3 or 4 years and see how people feel. Check the comments even, and I think people are going to have a lot more of a positive reaction. Maybe not so much now, but in the future, 100%. But I think it's a great game with amazing fundamentals that just makes a few really weird decisions and just suffers from a lack of focus. That's basically its biggest crime, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not really the worst thing that Call of Duty has ever done, and it's not the worst COD game out there. There were real attempts at innovation and expanding to what Call of Duty could be, which I can appreciate, but not all of them landed, unfortunately, and hopefully they can learn from this mistake and clean up a little bit what they've done here to make a better Call of Duty moving forward into the future.